And so later on today, we're going to be together again with a group of students here, and I'll be talking about doing qualitative work that can be both critical and relevant, right? And I think that that's very important and very possible. So for example, a previous project I did in suburban Columbus, Ohio, one of the strong themes that came out of that was the degree to which these more affluent suburban students were acquiring psychological capital to prepare themselves for a neoliberal era. So to prepare themselves to compete, to prepare themselves for uncertain futures characterized by risk. And so that in itself is a kind of critical project. More recently, many of us are aware that there's been a lot of attention paid to non-cognitive factors associated with school success, grit, perseverance, school belonging, the notion that hard work pays off, academic mindsets. And so for me, one of the, it came to me a couple of years ago that there was a very strong relationship between these two broad categories of psychological capital and academic mindsets. And, but it was important for me to move towards the academic mindset and grit categories, because those are more categories in use among the education research community and educational policymakers and practitioners as well. So huge, AERA session a couple of years ago with Angela Duckworth and Walton and all these people, Carol Dweck. And so I wrote a proposal for research funding at University of Minnesota and received a grant to undertake this kind of research. And actually the title of the proposal was addressing talent loss in the Twin Cities. And I think talent loss is an important way to think about how it is that many young people with great capabilities aren't able to succeed in school. And so at any rate, this was all about non-cognitive factors, but it was especially about how non-cognitive factors are acquired through sociocultural processes on the ground in everyday school life. And so one of the things I'm trying to do there, which I think is also uniquely ethnographic and qualitative in a way, is looking at the social construction of grit. And so I'm calling this a grounded grit project, and how it is that these academic mindsets shouldn't really be viewed as merely the accumulation of individual efforts, but they actually represent all kinds of social contact and relationships and local beliefs and efforts to build up young people and their capabilities. And so that's one important part of this. Another part of this that I'll talk about later today was wanting to, and this has to do with the local relevance as well, the school that I worked in over the last several years has struggled to implement an inclusion policy in the metro area, in the Twin Cities, like many schools have. And the policy is certainly the right direction in terms of trying to move many students who have been in self-contained classrooms into mainstream classrooms. And so there has been a movement to do that, but it happened very quickly without time for teachers to be trained as co-teaching teams, and also without time for these young people to be socialized into the regular comprehensive high school environment. And so they were moved from these self-contained classrooms into these regular classrooms, and that was difficult for a lot of these students. And all of a sudden also there's a huge range of reading levels in these classrooms, and a lot of these young people are frustrated. And so the people on the ground in the schools would say that they were, some of that frustration was getting acted out in hallways, which were increasingly chaotic. And a lot of teachers were getting very, very frustrated with this in the school, especially over the last 2 years. And some of them went to the press about it. And so there was and I'll talk about this later on today, and so there was an article that came out in a local newspaper in the metro area about the school's hallways. And it was racialized, and it was somewhat incendiary. And so it was very frustrating for other people in the school to see this, and to, in the words of the principal, the school was in some ways on fire. And so I had a commitment to the school, and this is part of that local problems part that I'm talking about in terms of where our work kind of gets its direction. And that all happened at the very end of the 2014-15 school year. That article came out at the end of May. And I felt compelled to write another article for, in one of these newspapers, online newspapers. The other one was an online newspaper and print, that provided another kind of perspective on the school and many of the positive things going on in the school. The school was identified as a beating the odds school in terms of getting so many students on college pathways, in terms of its remarkable trends in reading outcomes for students, especially English language learners, and you know all about this. And so I quickly, took pen to paper, sat at the keyboard, and wrote another article, and I titled it "Inside Beating the Odds High School," and it came out on the last day of school. And I also talked about how many students in this school seem to be acquiring some of these non-cognitive factors associated with academic success, and here's how, and here's why. And so that ended up being a pretty positive thing to do. It just received a lot of support and some acclaim, a lot of views. It was the second most read article in that section of the newspaper the whole year and all this. And so, but that also involved writing in a different register, right? And so, and I think that's also important for ethnographers to keep in mind that, look, we all have had all kinds of experiences, and we're all capable of writing and communicating in many different ways. With many different people for different purposes. So that's another, I think, really important message.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.